On the broadcast tonight, race case. President Obama weighs in again on that controversial arrest, trying to tamp down a firestorm he helped ignite. And tonight, the arresting officer tells his side of the story. Flu fears. The search for a swine flu vaccine gets more urgent tonight, and there is flu news for the parents of very young children. Out of office, what Americans think about Sarah Palin as she prepares for the next move in her career, and making a difference by conquering a giant. Nightly News begins now.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
Good evening. I'm Amy Robach in tonight for Brian Williams. And tonight, President Obama has again put himself squarely in the center of controversy over race. This afternoon, he made a surprise appearance in the White House press room and admitted he made a poor choice of words when he said a white police officer had acted stupidly by arresting a black scholar from Harvard. The president also said he had called the arresting officer, who is now telling his story on camera for the first time. We have two reports tonight, and we begin our coverage with our chief White House correspondent, Chuck Todd. Good evening, Chuck.
Good evening, Amy. Well, as you know, it was been less than 48 hours since the president made those remarks about the Gates arrest, so he decided to try to deal with this media firestorm himself and put out the fire.
Hey, it's a cameo appearance.
In an unannounced visit to the White House press briefing room, President Obama attempted to tamp down a media firestorm he sparked himself Wednesday night.
The Cambridge police acted stupidly.
Those words about the arrest of his friend, Harvard professor Henry Gates, pitted Mr. Obama against not just arresting Officer Sergeant James Crowley, but the entire Cambridge Police Department.
In our view, there was nothing stupid about what happened. What happened to produce a different outcome was directly under the control of Professor Gates, and that's something that I think the president does not fully appreciate.
The local police unions demanded a presidential apology. A few hours later, the president responded.
I unfortunately then gave an impression that I was maligning the Cambridge Police Department or Sergeant Crowley specifically, and I could have calibrated those words differently.
The president made his remarks just after getting off the phone with Sergeant Crowley, a conversation that the White House did not characterize as an apology.
My impression of him was that he was an outstanding police officer and a good man, and that was confirmed in the phone conversation, and I told him that.
The president stood by some of his statement from Wednesday, but also cast some blame for the incident on Gates, whom he telephoned after he spoke with the press.
I continue to believe, based on what I have heard, that there was an overreaction in pulling Professor Gates out of his home to the station. I also continue to believe, based on what I heard, that Professor Gates probably overreacted as well.
The president then tried to refocus attention on the bigger issue of racial profiling.
My hope is that as a consequence of this event, this ends up being what's called a teachable moment.
A meeting between Sergeant Crowley, Professor Gates, and the president is likely in the offing.
There was discussion about he and I and Professor Gates having a beer here in the White House. We don't know if that's scheduled yet, but we may put that together.
The president sympathized with Crowley over the media frenzy, and the sergeant even asked the president to plead with the media for privacy.
Sergeant Crowley would be happy for you to stop trampling his grass.
Now, Amy, remember, the whole issue of racial profiling is actually very personal to the president. Let me read you an excerpt from his memoir, Audacity of Hope. He wrote, "Police cars pulling me over for no apparent reason. I know what it's like to have people tell me I can't do something because of my color." Amy?
And Chuck, how much pressure was President Obama under to speak out now and try to move beyond those comments?
Well, you know, he acknowledged it himself. You know, earlier this morning, Robert Gibbs told a group of us in his office that he wasn't going to, no more from the White House on this issue. But the fact is, they saw that the media was continuing to cover this. The president himself talked about the fact that he wanted to get back on the issue of health care. Remember, he made those comments on Wednesday during a press conference on health care, which, by the way, that didn't go so well today on the House side, Amy.
All right, Chuck Todd from the White House, thanks. And now to Cambridge, Massachusetts, where all of this started when a neighbor called police about a possible break-in at the Gates home and where Sergeant James Crowley is speaking out. NBC's Ron Allen is in Cambridge. Ron, good evening.
Good evening, Amy. Before the president spoke out, all eyes were here on Cambridge, where the incident did happen. And as you said, the arresting officer is now telling his side of the story, and his fellow cops are offering their support.
We completely support Sergeant Crowley and the fine men and women of the Cambridge Police Department.
The police union representing Sergeant James Crowley rallied in his defense today. Crowley himself did not speak, but he has told NBC's WHDH-TV about his arrest of Dr. Henry Louis Gates.
I asked him if he could step outside and speak with me, and he said, "No, I will not." And again, words to the effect of, "What's this all about?" And I said, "I'm Sergeant Crowley from the Cambridge Police Department."
Sergeant Crowley insists Professor Gates provoked the confrontation the moment the officer explained he was responding to a 911 call about a possible break-in.
And he responded, "Why? Because I'm a black man in America," in a very agitated tone. And again, I thought that was a little strange.
Crowley said he's finally spoken out because he was tired of being called a racist. He is an 11-year veteran, father of 3, who for several years has trained officers how to avoid racial profiling, exactly what Gates accused him of doing.
He was the one that was being provocative. This wasn't a back and forth exchange of banter or arguing. This was one-sided.
Today, an African-American sergeant, seen in the foreground of this photo of the arrest, defended Crowley, saying he never heard the professor call anyone a racist, but Crowley still was right to arrest him.
I support what he did 100%.
It's over. There's no more story to it.
Professor Gates remains in his vacation home on Martha's Vineyard, speaking out in this Sirius radio interview.
Just because a black man answers the door and you're responding to a 911 charge, treat him, or in the case of an African-American woman, with respect. Don't go presuming. Don't do anything else. Protect me.
Gates has threatened to sue. His lawyer told CNN there are witnesses who have had similar experiences with Sergeant Crowley. But some community leaders are growing more concerned about the damage such an emotional and drawn-out confrontation could be doing.
Professor Gates needs to sit down with Sergeant Crowley, and they need to bury the hatchet for the sake of the country and for the black community.
The police are still trying to determine whether they will issue and make public the police radio traffic from that night, audio tapes which could contain some of what Crowley and Gates said to each other. Even though Crowley has been cleared of any wrongdoing, the police are still going to ask for an independent investigation of what happened as they try to maintain the community's trust. Amy?
Ron Allen in Cambridge, Massachusetts, thank you. David Gregory is the moderator of Meet the Press. David, was the president successful today in diffusing the situation as he had hoped to do, or did he end up throwing more fuel on the fire?
Well, look, he had a big role in escalating this, which now he acknowledges. Remember, he's coming full circle on this. I think, by all accounts, talking to those who were close to him, this was a heartfelt response that he had during the press conference the other night based on what he knew and as an African-American man. He then was agitated yesterday that it got the kind of media attention that it got. By today, I think there was a recognition that when the president weighs in, it's going to carry some weight. And I think the White House wants to extricate him from this, but now he's talking about having a beer at the White House with Gates and the arresting officer. So I don't know if we've seen the end of this yet.
All right. And David, this controversy, we heard Chuck Todd allude to this, has clearly overshadowed the president's agenda on health care reform. Where does that all stand right now?
Well, one of the reasons why I think the president was agitated about this yesterday, that it was getting the attention that it got. Chuck alluded to a setback in the House. It does not appear from the House now that they'll vote on a health care bill by the August recess, which means that the August recess deadline that the president set looks to be falling by the wayside altogether. Now, inside the White House, they say it's okay. A lot of the committee work is being done, and a deadline was important, but it does shape up to be a tactical defeat at this level. And the concern is that the longer this hangs out there without conclusion, that it allows the momentum of opposition to only grow, something that is a dangerous sign over the horizon.
And David, finally, what do you have coming up this weekend on Meet the Press?
We've got an exclusive interview for the entire hour with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. It's her first live Sunday morning interview after logging 100,000 miles around the world. There's a lot of hot spots and a lot to talk about with her.
All right, David Gregory, as always, thank you.
Thank you.
And speaking of Secretary Clinton, tonight she had some harsh words for the ousted president of Honduras, Manuel Zelaya, who was recently deposed in that bloody coup and today briefly crossed the border back into Honduras, then reversed course and returned to Nicaragua. Mrs. Clinton called his action a reckless attempt to provoke a confrontation. We are learning more tonight about which Republican senators will vote for and against the confirmation of Supreme Court nominee Sonia Sotomayor. Orrin Hatch of Utah said today he will vote against her, his first no vote on any Supreme Court nominee since he came to the Senate in 1977. Senator John Cornyn of Texas also said he will vote no, but acknowledged Sotomayor will almost certainly be confirmed despite his vote. So far, 10 Republicans have said they will vote no, 5 will vote yes. California's legislature has put a new state budget in place tonight after almost a month without one. The new budget rejected some of the deep cuts needed to close a $26 billion gap. Now it will be up to Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger to finish the job. Here is NBC's George Lewis.
Please call the roll.
The final votes in the California legislature as lawmakers tried to wrap up a budget.
It is 1:30 in the afternoon. We have been in session for almost 24 hours.
Pulling an all-nighter as they wrangled over cuts to a hose off Santa Barbara failed to pass this afternoon. The legislature also gave back to the cities $1 billion it was threatening to take away. That may stop some of the lawsuits, but it leaves holes in the budget, and the governor will have to come up with some more gimmicks to fill those holes. Amy?
NBC's George Lewis, thank you. The federal minimum wage went up today, the final step in a 3-phase increase that started in 2007. It's a 70-cent per hour jump from $6.55 an hour to $7.25. Some small business owners criticize the timing of the increase, saying it's a burden in a weak economy. And turning now to Wall Street, stocks hung on to their huge gains this week. The Dow was up just under 24 points. The Nasdaq snapped a 12-session winning streak with a 7-point decline, and the S&P 500 gained just under 3 points. When Nightly News continues this Friday evening, a sobering new report on swine flu from federal health officials, what you need to know about vaccines. And later, making sure a disability did not keep them from getting to the top and making a difference. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control is out with new projections on swine flu in this country. 40% of the population could come down with it in the next 2 years, and deaths could climb into the hundreds of thousands. They're also talking tonight about efforts to get people vaccinated. NBC's Rahima Ellis has the details.
Today, the Centers for Disease Control issued new, broader guidelines regarding Rahima Ellis, NBC News, New York.
When we come back, Sarah Palin's final days as governor. Andrea Mitchell has the latest on what's next for her. Alaska governor and former vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin will hand her duties over to her lieutenant governor this weekend, 3 weeks after she shocked the political world with the announcement of her resignation. But as NBC's Andrea Mitchell tells us, she has no intention of fading away.
As the Palin family moves out of the governor's mansion, Sarah Palin's long goodbye looks more like a campaign hello. Daily picnics starting today in Wasilla, another tomorrow in Anchorage, then the handoff to her lieutenant governor Sunday in Fairbanks. That should leave a lot more time for fishing.
How's the fishing?
It's good. But if Palin is fishing for votes, a future run for president, she's got some serious work to do. A new Washington Post ABC poll today says a majority, 53%, now views her negatively, her lowest approval rating since she burst onto the national stage a year ago. Palin is still popular with Republicans. 70% of them like her. But among all voters, 57% say she doesn't understand complex issues.
It would be apathetic to just kind of hunker down and go with the flow. We're fishermen. We know that only dead fish go with the flow.
Many say she hurt herself by quitting. You haven't finished the job, some would say.
You're not listening to me as to why I wouldn't be able to finish that final year in office without it costing the state millions of dollars.
Arnold Schwarzenegger on Palin today.
Would you ever see me resigning in the middle of my term, even if it is the 100th term?
I will never give up.
Palin is also plagued by ethics charges. Most were dismissed, but only today, State Personnel Board investigator Thomas Daniel told NBC News there is probable cause to believe that Governor Palin was in violation of state ethics laws by soliciting private donations to pay for legal debts. Palin's attorney said the matter is still pending. Whatever you have seen was released in violation of law. Palin responded yesterday on Twitter, quote, "Filer of Friv ethics complaint leaks confidential documents out of context to create false headlines." Palin is still a headliner for party fundraisers, giving her a chance to rebuild her reputation with Republican kingmakers. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News, Washington.
Up next, our Friday Making a Difference report, a momentous achievement despite all the odds.
That changed everything. Some of the men accused still walk free.
This guy is ground central for Al Qaeda.
The wanted will track him down.
That looks like him. Get ready to move.
This guy's definitely trying to burn us.
The Wanted, Monday, 9/8 Central on NBC.
Making a Difference. Brought to you by Vesicare.
Time for our Friday report on people who are making a difference. Tonight, a climb to the top of one of the world's highest mountains, a feat for anybody. But for the 8 climbers you're about to meet, a climb up Kilimanjaro wasn't just for the bragging rights. They had something to prove. NBC's Lee Cowan has their story.
Mountains, the saying goes, are climbed because they're there. But what if a giant like Kilimanjaro to keep climbing? Lee Cowan, NBC News, Phoenix.
And that's our broadcast for this Friday night. Thank you for being with us. I'm Amy Robach, in tonight for Brian Williams, and I'll see you tomorrow morning on Today. Have a good weekend and good night.
Sunday, a Hillary Clinton exclusive. The Secretary of State on some of the world's most dangerous hotspots. If it's Sunday,